What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more PGA DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for the RBC Canadian Open up in Toronto, Canada. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. I'm joined by Niromada, our PGA analyst at Occupy Fantasy. Nero, happy post Scheffler week. No Scheffler in the field this week, so I'm sure you're feeling great.
Yeah, I've slowly been erasing the tire tracks off of my forehead for the last couple days. Have the U.S. Open next week, National Open with the Canadian Open this week, so should be a great little 2 week stretch of golf we got staring us in the face.
Absolutely. So let's not waste any time. What we'll do in this video, we will break down the top plays in our data-driven Occupy model for the RBC Canadian Open. Then we'll look ahead to see what industry projections are telling us who will be the higher-owned golfers in the small field GPPs, high-dollar GPPs, and tournaments compared to other contests. We'll see what the betting markets are telling us as of Tuesday afternoon. We do have one trifecta play. Golfers' odds have improved at every single sportsbook we've tracked so far, plus a couple other movers at multiple sportsbooks. Stick around for that. We'll close out the show with any weather or showdown related tips. And of course, and this has been a hit over the last couple of videos, you all really have liked the live lineup building segment. So we'll do that once again. We'll build a small field GPP lineup based on everything we talked about in this video at the very end. So make sure you don't skip ahead and make sure you stick around to the very end for that. So Nero, as you said, no Scotty in this field. Very nice. So our play Scotty or fade Scotty game will return next week for the U.S. Open. But instead here at the RBC Canadian Open, we have a newer course that we haven't seen on the PGA Tour. So before we jump into the top 7 plays in the model, really quickly, how can you explain to our viewers the best way we model this course and what you're looking at for this course?
Yeah, sure. I think in the industry first, though, they call this a tease. So I've got a lot of thoughts on the play Scotty, fade Scotty. So for those of you who are interested in those, tune in next week. Brian and I spent a good chunk of Sunday afternoon discussing the fade Scotty, play Scotty dynamic. So we'll get into that next week when we do the U.S. Open video. So for this course, so this is the Canadian Open. It's a national open. A lot of times for these national opens, very similar to the US Open here in the United States, they rotate the course. So it's never at the same golf course. They tend to have a bit of a rotation, like they will visit some of the best courses repeatedly, maybe once every 7 or 8 years. You're always back at some club in Hamilton or something like that in Canada. But for this one, we're at the TPC Toronto North course. Yeah, there we go. And it's a par 70, 7,400 yards, a lot of bunkers. And the greens are, from what I can tell, seem to be pretty difficult. So they're kind of pushed up, which means a lot of them are raised, which would mean that you have slopey areas off to the side, runoff areas, and like you would see at the U.S. Open, the rough is going to be up this week. So when you're looking at breaking down a course, you're seeing, number one, how far is it? Like, what's the distance, and how does that distance relate to par? So a 7,400 yard course is pretty long, but for a par 72, it wouldn't be crazy long because you usually would have four par fives in that par 72, taking up a lot of that yardage. This is only a par 70. There's only two par fives on the course. The first, ironically, excuse me, it's the first hole and the 18th hole. Everything else is not a par five, either a par four or a par three. So for a par 70 at 7,400 yards, pretty long golf course. So I would look at it as, I know I need to be good off the tee. That's just straight off the bat. Just by looking at par 70, 7,400 yards, should be advantage to the distance guys. You're gonna want to have a nice short game because the greens, if I'm right, and they are kind of pushed up, difficult, slopey, you're gonna want to be able to attack around the greens, and then also you're gonna, approach shot would be meaningful in the same way that it's like meaningful at Augusta for the Masters, meaning that sure, you could get around Augusta by not being a great iron player, with having a tremendous short game for the chipping and putting on those very slopey, tough greens. Or you could go Corey Connor style and just really hit your irons into the correct quadrant of the green over and over and over again. So that's how I would break it down. That's how I look at it. So I'm going driving distance up at the top, short game probably next, and then the approach play would be third for how I'm going to emphasize the players and their attributes this week.
And the model has picked up on a lot of those attributes. That's what the model has decided to go with this week when ranking the players. And just a quick note, we talked about it last week, I believe, where when we look at what actually matters versus what is predicted to happen, oftentimes if something's wrong, that's how we can get an advantage on lower owned golfers. For example, the example we used was at Colonial when typically accuracy matters and distance ended up mattering. That could play out especially at on a week where we have a newer course. So while this looks like what could be relevant for this course, maybe that changes. It's another week to heavily consider lower owned golfers and pivots away from the more popular golfers. So Nero, and I think this can be represented number one in our model this week. No one's going to have him number one in our model, but it's Victor Perez, who, and a lot of the guys in the top 7 of our model this week are due for some positive putting regression. Victor Perez is number one in putting regression statistics, but he's also a well-rounded golfer.
Yeah, so definitely not not the person I would have expected to see sitting at the top of the model this week. Um, what Perez is he is a well-rounded golfer. So he ranks top 40 for most of the metrics that we're counting on this week, and he's pretty good on um, mid level to easy scoring courses, and that's what we've kind of categorized this as. Should be somewhere in that mid level, possibly easy. There's been some rain in the run up, so it might be softer than usual. The greens might not be as severe because they might have a hard time keeping them firm and fast if the rain in the run up has actually softened the course again. Pay attention. We'll be reading through the press conference quotes over the next 2 days to see what the players are thinking about the condition of the course. But if that's the case, then Perez is actually surprisingly well-rounded for that type of test, and I think that's why you see him sitting up at the top of the model. And again, you know, for those of you who are Occupy members, you don't need to know anything more than if Victor Perez shows up at the top of the model and he's projected for 5% ownership or less, which he is, he's worth being in your player pool. And again, the nice thing is you do not need to be crazy. Just having 10% of Victor Perez or maybe even 8 or 9% of Victor Perez will give you 2x what the field has. And that's all that you need to have more exposure than the field to him.
Now, number 2 and number 3 are probably golfers you would expect to be here, and it's two of the top 7 price golfers. It's Robert McIntyre and Taylor Pendrith, who are guys we think of when we think of longer courses. We think of strokes gained off the tee.
Yeah, especially Pendrith really fits that, like a bomber who makes birdies. Pendrith is one of the top people that comes to mind for me. Wyndham Clark kind of fits that profile as well. Might not be the best iron players, but wow, really strong off the tee, and they can get real hot with the putter on occasion. McIntyre a little bit more like Perez, just a level or two above him in that, instead of being in the top 40 in most of the metrics, he's like top 20, top 25 in most of the metrics that we're looking at. Also gets some of that trademark Occupy putting regression tag in the model, so that obviously helps him.
Number 4 is not the stud you're thinking of. It is a stud that Nero wrote up in the Daily Plug last week. It's Ludwig Oberg, who Nero showed some incredible signs of life, signs that we've been looking for the past couple of events, with that 66 in round 4 at the Memorial.
Yeah, so 2 angles that really like here. Number 1, if you've been watching this or consuming Occupy content for a while, we're always looking for the guys who figured something out in the 4th round of the previous event. You'll often see that carry over into the next event. And my rationale for Ludwig last week was just like, look, he's obviously outstanding as a golfer. He was going to be the lowest owned guy above 8K. And these types of players, these very, uber talented top 1% of the 1% types, like they can turn their form around on a dime. So it's much better, to be on them when they're kind of at the low ebb, hopefully, of their form, about ready to turn around, than to be on them 3 weeks after that, after they've already showed you that they've turned it around. He also, even with the struggles this year, still rates top 20, in most of those 5 big metrics that we're looking at this week.
Yeah, Ludwig, again, these are the type of guys, especially as a stud with his price tag. We'll monitor his ownership throughout the week. Hopefully, it doesn't get too out of control, but it may not with Connors right below him and Roy right above him. Next is another guy that you may not expect. He is an Occupy favorite. It is Eric Van Rooyen, who near a little peek behind the curtain on the model here. We talked about this with a golfer a couple of weeks ago, and it's we're changing some putting surfaces here. These putting surfaces at TPC Toronto are bent grass POA mix, and Eric Van Rooyen is one of the better putters in the field on that type of surface. Plus, he gets the positive putting regression tag in the model on the back end. Marry those two together, it could be the time for that putting to regress because he's back on greens that he is familiar with and has putted on better historically.
Yeah. So, again, go back behind the curtain, can you figure out why? Well, that grass mixture is very popular for Midwestern and Northern golf courses. Tends to be able to handle wintering and cooler weather pretty well. Where did Eric Van Rooyen go to college? He went to the University of Minnesota. So, no surprise that that is a preferred surface for him. And I checked; it does not seem like there's a lot of water on this course, which is the one place you don't want to play Van Rooyen because he's like magnetically attracted to it. And on the data level, he is not too far removed. He was second at the Byron Nelson literally a month ago, so not too far removed from being just really close to a win. So we know the form is there simmering.
Yeah, and if this course plays on the easier spectrum, closer to Byron Nelson scoring, that would be a plus for Van Rooyen's status as well. And he did
Yep.
take one large line move, like a ridiculously large line move at a book that we were tracking as of yesterday. So that's another check mark for the EVR column. Next, we have Thomas Detry and Matty Schmid closing out the top seven of the model. Nero, tell me about these two Europeans.
I think maybe no surprise on Detry in the sense that he is very well rounded as a player. Like doesn't really do anything that will blow your doors off, but he's also not really terrible in any of the categories either. He's made four of his last five cuts. All those finishes have been in the 30s, so he's been close. Not obviously not quite there, but he's been close. So I think that well-roundedness, all-around nature of his game puts him in good stead. He's also someone that I think has a very high career ceiling. He hasn't won as much as he probably should have. And he's maybe at the lower end of kind of like a performance cycle. He should be ready to do something a little bit better than he has been doing. So I think Van Rooyen makes a ton of sense, and I was glad to see him up near the top. And Mag Schmid, again, if we're paying attention, almost had the win right at the Byron Nelson. In fact, his chip in on 18 there too was very expensive for my lineup actually that we covered last week. FanDuel, if he would have missed that, made bogey, he would drop down and tie second with Bud Colley, who I had on my team. I did not have Schmidt on my team, but a number of the players above me did. So anyway, but yeah, playing very good. He's a long player, and I think he could go quite well this week.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised he missed the cut last week at the Memorial. Didn't fit his game as much, and coming off that grueling second place finish at the Charles Schwab, so certainly makes sense that I wouldn't hold that against him. And have a little note on Matty Schmid in the betting market segment, so file that in your back pocket. Nero, to close out the model segment of the video, notably absent from the top seven is Rory McIlroy, and people may say that's insane, and I may agree with you, right? Because obviously he's top one in quite a few metrics. If there's a
Yeah.
course that favors distance and driving, Rory's going to be at the top of that. So his floor and ceiling is extremely high here. He does have the negative putting regression incoming, the opposite of some of these other guys we've talked about. And just to bring Scotty back up, we talked about on this show last week, Scotty had the negative putting regression tag in the model. He lost strokes putting last week, still managed to win the event by 4 shots. So just because someone doesn't putt well and they're as good as Rory and Scheffler does not mean that they can't win the tournament and be the top DFS play, but it is something to consider when we're making our lineups.
Yeah, 100%. Now, again, we're not being crazy here. Who's the best golfer in this field? Well, it's Rory McIlroy.
Yes.
Like, and it's not particularly close. That doesn't mean that he's a must play this week. because his last name does not rhyme with Scheffler. So he plays more human, as you noted. He has very high ceiling, but he tends to play to his floor more often than the elite players like Scotty does, which means you don't have to play him. Now, again, just because he ranks a little bit lower in a few of those categories, which then drops his model ranking down. And again, the model's taking into account the fact that he's going to be 40% owned or higher this week. So, don't misconstrue it. He's still the best golfer in the field, but it doesn't mean that he's the best play this week in DFS. Doesn't mean that you have to play him this week in DFS.
Now let's take a look at some other projections. As we say in this next segment every week in this video, we look at industry projections to tell us who are sharper PGA DFS players going to play in their high dollar tournaments. These golfers, historically, every week, like clockwork, are much higher owned in higher dollar GPPs and smaller field GPPs above $5 than they are in the large 150 max contest, because we know that sharper players follow these industry projections to a T. So Nero, let's take a look this week, and the list is a little bit more exhaustive than it was last week. Talk us through who are the golfers that we're going to open up our $100 single entry GPP this week and be like, wow, this guy is much higher owned than he is in the $25. Who are those guys this week?
Yeah, we got four of them across both sites. So across both DraftKings and FanDuel, you've got Rory, again, no surprise. Corey Connors, Alex Smalley, Doug Gim. Connors also not a surprise at all. Smalley and Gim, I think, kind of fit in that category of the players who are just simply, mispriced for their odds to win in the betting markets.
Yep.
And then on DK specifically, you'd add Cam Young and Ryan Fox to those four. Now, Cam Young is not a name that we've been saying very often on these preview shows all season long. He's quietly, very quietly, been playing better golf over the last couple weeks. So, someone who you definitely want to keep an eye on this week. And then on FanDuel, we're going to add Max McGreevy and Rio Hisatune to Rory Connors, Smalley, and Doug Gim.
By the way, Rio is on this list every week solely to test your ability to pronounce his last name.
Oh, man, it's yeah. I think that is the incorrect pronunciation. The CBS and the TV guys, they alternate between that one and then one where they emphasize the Sioux for longer. So I'm not exactly sure how you do it, but I'm gonna figure it out before the end of this, and then I'm gonna come back to you.
I think the PGA Tour guide pronunciation guide is Hisatsune. If you're out there and you
Okay.
have the pronunciation guide, let us know in the comments how it's actually
Yeah,
pronounced.
please.
By the way, you mentioned Cam Young. I think he won the qualifier for the U.S. Open on Monday in like a five-way playoff. So add another check mark to slowly picking up steam as we approach these summer tournaments. So Cam Young 7,500 will be higher owned in higher dollar GPPs. But again, if you're playing $3 or less on either FanDuel or DraftKings, these guys are great plays, and they won't be nearly as highly owned as they are in the higher dollar stuff. Now, everyone's second favorite segment, because their favorite segment is now creating the lineup at the end of the show. Everyone's second favorite segment is what are the betting markets telling us? Early market movers. Nero, we have one early trifecta play. This golfer, his odds to win have improved at every sports book we tracked over the last 48 hours. And this final list is extremely predictive every single week. However, it's not finalized until Wednesday evening. So this next golfer, he probably will stay on the list, but he could be removed from the list as well. So make sure you are a member of OccupyFantasy.com when Nero puts it in the Wednesday update in the Daily Plug, and in our Discord server where I post the final list Wednesday nights of who the final list of trifecta plays are. Nero, it's Matty Schmidt, top 7 in the model, talked about already, and just we haven't talked about his ownership yet. Our early model projection has been just around 7%. So we got a trifecta play that the model likes that isn't extremely outrageously highly owned. Gear up for your bankroll.
I mean, and he's affordable, by the way.
Yes.
$7,500 price point on DraftKings. So, I mean, really just, we talk about trifecta, but this would be the center of the bullseye of a trifecta play. That is an affordable price player who is rated very highly by the model with a lower ownership projection that is getting, universal love in the betting markets. Like that's just a lot of yes signals for a single player. If that holds, when you're wondering how to play it, like these are the types of players that I would like to be aggressive with
Yes.
in terms of getting over the field on them. So, and again, you could go crazy and have 40% Matty Schmidt, and you could have 8x the field or 7x the field. I wouldn't personally do that, so I'm not advocating that anyone does, but my point is that, you can be pretty aggressive and you can get well over the field and still not be like out over your skis for your total player pool.
Yeah, honestly, even if you had 30%, which I think is probably right in the zone of where you want to do it, that's still, even if he somehow misses, you still have 70% of your lineups left. I think I would be more
Yep.
aggressive with Schmid. Like if you're making
Yep.
six small field lineups, have him in two. That's 33%. If you want to get really aggressive, have him in 3 out of 6. So a lot of ways you can play, but either
Yep.
way, the key takeaway here is a lot of check marks for Matty Schmid this week, and the betting markets do cement that. Nero, we have 6 other guys who have had moves at multiple sports books, not every sports book that we track, but just run us through those 6 guys, and if there's anything that sticks out for you.
Yeah. So McElroy, Ludwig, like we talked about already, Kitayama, Sam Burns. So there's four really long players, really good drivers of the golf ball. All four of those players, and can get real hot with their putters. And then our last two, Lee Hodges and Matt Wallace. So Wallace a little bit more in the kind of that well-rounded vein of the player that we've highlighted already a few times in this discussion, and then Lee Hodges, good long iron player. So you should, again, in theory, should have a few more longer approach shots on this course than you're used to having. Again, partially due to like no the less par fives, right? You only have two par fives, and that means you got a lot of distance being sucked up by longer par fours and long par threes. So you're going to be hitting some long approach shots, and Hodges has been excelling in that area this year.
If there's one thing that seemingly the sharp bettors agree on, as well as our motto, is long irons, like you just said, because that's a common theme among all 7 of these guys that are early market movers. So definitely
Yep.
place an emphasis on long iron play. And you can look at those stats at a variety of websites. PGA Tour has data as well if you're looking for just some free statistics. Nero, before we get to our lineup building segment here, any showdown or weather notes that you're seeing for the RBC Canadian?
It looks like it's pretty windy there today, and tomorrow it looks like it's going to be howling. But Thursday and Friday, extremely calm, and it looks like we're going to have a decent amount of rain overnight, Wednesday night, kind of overnight into Thursday morning. So I think it's really going to depend on how that plays. But let's say you just get a good amount of rain, not enough that it's like flooding or doing anything crazy, but like man, those Thursday morning starters are going to have a really soft golf course with not a lot of wind on it. I don't know if you're going to have better conditions than that for the whole rest of the event. So I don't know that I would go out of my way to play that angle in the classic contest and the 4-day contest, but I certainly would be keeping a very close eye on that weather forecast for my showdown round one contest. Now on the weekend, the wind is going to pick up and pretty significantly. I think we're going to be blowing 15-ish, maybe 20 for constant with up to 30-mile-an-hour gusts for a lot of Saturday and Sunday. So, might have a little bit bigger emphasis on some wind players, Shane Lowry's, McIntyre's, those types of players. But again, it's like you can't overplay that angle because guess what? If you don't get to the weekend, if you can't score during those two super calm
Right.
days on Thursday and Friday, once the winds start blowing, it doesn't matter if you're in your hotel room. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind. Maybe you use it to like as a tiebreaker, but not as a like, oh my God, I have to be dialed in really really closely on these wind players.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Again, if you don't make the weekend, you cannot take advantage of that. So now let's build a small field, the GPP lineup. We'll say 500 players or less, 1,000 players or less. This is not for your mass multi-entry. You would use our lineup builder or optimizer for that. It's not a cash game lineup, but something in the middle, 500 to 100 player, 500 to 1,000 players, maybe less. Exponential payouts where you want to play a couple higher owned guys, definitely a couple lower owned golfers, maybe not any 1% owned golfers, but some sort of mix. The lineup construction that Nero lays out in the daily plug is perfect for this type of contest. So, what we try to do, as we've talked about the last couple of times we've performed this exercise, we look at who's the cheapest guy we feel comfortable using, who are the multiple overlap plays, whether it's betting markets, model, Nero's thoughts, etc. And then if we keep in mind ownership as we go about this. So Nero, I'm just going to plug and play Matty Schmid right off the bat because he checks so many boxes for us. That would be a
Like it.
that would be that would qualify as the multiple overlap play. Now I'll kick it to you. Who is the cheapest guy we feel comfortable using? Obviously, we have a bunch of no-namers who qualified for the National Open at the bottom of the tournament, but anybody in the 6K range or low sevens that you feel the most comfortable using?
Yeah, it's good. It's a really good question. There's a few that I like that would be up in the upper sevens. I mean, it's hard to argue against Victor Perez sitting at 7K, top of the model, low ownership. If you did have Perez and Schmid in there, and again, it's like, okay, this is only a 500 player contest, right? And you're like, well, that's a little risky, but it's like when you look at this field beyond like the top 10 guys, like, it gets thinned out real quick. So like, this isn't like a field where you're going to be able to put in six guys where you know all their names and you feel really good about playing them. Even in the smaller contests, like even in cash games, you're going to have to play one or two players that you would normally never play in cash games. So anyway, if you did that, you're left with 8,900 a player, and you can basically play whoever you want from there because you've got two pretty low owned players already on your board, and I think you've got a ton of lineup building freedom from that point forward.
Yeah, those are all fantastic points, and I was thinking the same thing as well. Once you have a guy who's 5% projected, again, this is as of Tuesday, and the next guy is 7%, in a small field GPP, you can do literally whatever you want following that, and now we can play the best plays in the model in the betting markets and whatever it may be. So if we want to go Ludwig up top, 10-5, if we want to go Taylor Pendrith next at 96, that leaves us 7,700 left per player. Then we could play all sorts of guys. We could play Rio, who Nero cannot pronounce, Alex Smalley, but just with Schmidt and Perez, Nero, with this start, would you go all the way up to Rory? I know for the bingo card, you would build more balanced here, but who's the next guy you would put into this type of lineup?
Well, my first thing to say would be that you and I have been doing this way too long together because before you even started talking, the two names that I just clicked automatically were Ludwig and Pendrith.
So there we go.
So there you go. So I think that's where I would say that where I would take this in that direction, which would leave us 7,700 remaining. Now, by the way, you could easily play Rory if that was your, feel for this with this type of lineup, because again, that Schmid Perez start leaves you with just so much flexibility and freedom. But I would prefer to go with Ludwig and Pendrith, and then now we've got 7,700 for our last two spots. And there's a lot of different things that we can do. You got Rio at 7,600 right there. You've got Detry up at 7,900, so you could grab Detry and then drop back down. We talked about Matt Wallace getting those two line moves at 8K, and then drop back down to 7,400 for that last one. Yeah, you got a lot of opportunity, a lot of chances.
Yeah, if we just played Wallace at 8K, that leaves EVR at 7,300. We talked about him in the model and getting the putting regression. But again, a lot of ways you can go about this, and we do not have to worry about ownership because we started with Schmidt and Perez. Now, just Nero, as we close it out, that's been a stark difference. The last couple of weeks, a couple of the overlap plays and cheapest guys we felt comfortable using were a little more popular. So we were looking for lower owned guys at the top. This is just all to say it's a fluid process. Every week is different, and despite having the same structural process when hand building a small field GPP lineup, who those first couple of guys that you put in are will dictate the rest. Because someone asked last week in the comments, they said, yes, you talk about all these players, but how important is ownership and leverage? And Nero, I answered it, but I think just to expand it a little bit here, it's more important in a game with as much volatility as golf that leverage and ownership should be your number one guiding decision making when you come to building lineups in PGA DFS.
I mean, outside of Scotty Scheffler, the rest of these guys are human beings, and they actually play golf with the amount of variance that is present in the game itself. So, I think you should be taking that into account almost more in PGA DFS than you do in any other DFS sport, because there's just so much added volatility and randomness in golf, again, for all players not named Scheffler, that it just really, your payoff on the weeks that you're right is so much better. It just is, you do this long enough and you just know that that payoff is coming eventually. And it's so much better, so much easier to get to that place when you have that proper ownership and leverage incorporated into your lineup.
And a fantastic example of that is when I qualified for the Fantasy Golf World Championship this year. The key to my lineup was 1% Joe Highsmith. Yes, he won the tournament, but even if it finished second or third, I still would have won the qualifying ticket. It's about identifying those sub 5% guys who spike and that no one else has in your contest. So that'll do it for this video. If you like the lineup building segment, make sure you leave us a thumbs up and drop a comment to let us know how much you like that segment. All of our normal content will be posted at normal times at occupyfantasy.com, the Occupy model, the daily plug, the lineup builder is up and running, Wednesday update, trifecta plays, everything you need, occupyfantasy.com for as little as $7 per week, by the way. We know you watch these videos for free, but if you want that extra edge, just as little as $7 per week, it can get you access to that. Drop a comment. And subscribe, by the way, because our U.S. Open video will probably be live next Monday instead of Tuesday. So subscribing is the best way to get notified whenever that is released. So for Niro, I'm Brian. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Good luck and enjoy the RBC Canadian Open.